For this evening's talk, that I'm going to expand on a talk which I gave last night to the monks at the monastery over in Serpentine, and talk about the problem between control and freedom. Because many of you, like all of us, sometimes feel being pressed between other people wanting to control us, life controlling us, governments controlling us, even religions trying to control us, but also the fear of freedom and misunderstanding what freedom is. And should we actually control others? Because sometimes we have children. Should we be controlling them? Should we be controlling our diet? Should we be controlling the world? What should we do? How should we interact? And the whole idea of control becomes a very important thing we should truly understand. Because control is the opposite of freedom. And especially in Western worlds, but not just in Western worlds, we worship freedom, and quite rightly so. And we try and resist, control. And because of that, we always have a sense of contradiction in our lives between controlling and freedom. And this is what I want to explore in this evening's talk. And especially exploring it from a Buddhist perspective, where we're supposed to be letting go and liberating ourselves from cravings and attachments, and taking the no control to very, very powerful and deep levels, and actually seeing what happens when you do fully let go. But to start from the ordinary lifestyle of human beings in this world, that we live in an age where there are many groups and powerful beings, powerful people, powerful religions, powerful forces of nature, which you feel are trying to control you. And some of those you recognize, some of those you don't recognize. And I'm not quite sure about you, but even when I was young, I would like to resist those controllers. And what right have they to tell me what to do? And I'm sure that many of you that resent having speed cameras and speed limits, especially if you don't realize why they're there. Why should they tell me what to do? It's an open road, it's quite safe. And sometimes you read in a newspaper about food which you like is supposed to be fattening for you, and say, why should I listen to what they say? I'm going to eat what I like. Why should people be trying to control me? And then you go into a relationship, and sometimes you feel your partner is trying to control you, or you're in a relationship and then it's your mother trying to control you. And you say, look, I'm 50 years old and I'm married. I'm not a baby anymore. But still that mothers try and control you, even fathers try and control you, and governments try and control you. And the media tries to control you to make sure you listen to their programs or buy their products. And sometimes that we just feel like that we're in this battle between other people trying to control us, trying to possess us, trying to make us do what they want to do. And sometimes that we're controlled even when we go to places like airports, which I frequent very often. You have to board at a certain time, you have to go with certain things, you can't carry this and you can't carry that, and you can't bring this into the country, and you have to board at a certain time with people sitting in the back rows, please board first. And sometimes we feel that there's an assault on our freedoms. And the worst assault on our freedoms comes from life itself. When I want to enjoy myself, I want to be free, but I've got a bad back, I've got a bad knee, I've got a headache, I'm getting old and I can't do those things which I want to do. And of course the biggest control of all is the old age and death. When I don't want to die yet. Sometimes that we rebel even against the controller of this life. And so that there is, and I think it's a wonderful thing, an essential rebelliousness in the human spirit. And I celebrate that rebelliousness. And I tried and made my life, even though I'm part of an organized religion, or it's supposed to be organized, but any of you who join our Buddhist Society committee will know that Buddhism is not an organized religion. At least not the Buddhist Society of Western Australia. It sort of gets by. And sometimes I like it that way. If it was running too smoothly, sometimes I would think that's too inhuman. There must be something wrong there somewhere. But we get by, and we're quite successful getting by. And there's a reason for that, which I'll bring up later on, I hope. But sometimes that we forget the rebellious spirit of human beings, which is so important in our life. And at this time when we're supposed to be concerned about terrorists, when last week bombs in Thailand, so you're not supposed to go on holiday to Thailand, you're not supposed to climb up ladders which are too high. Sometimes do you feel that just there's too many things that I'm not supposed to do, and what the hell, I'm going to do it anyway? Sometimes that we rebel, and sometimes rebelling is very good. However, you should learn how to rebel properly. Because I remember when I was a school child in the hippie era, when we're supposed to be rebelling against authority. And to be rebellious, I decided to buy my first pair of green velvet trousers, bright green. And I thought that was being really, really sort of rebellious until I went to my first, these rock concerts. I think it was in the Isle of Wight. No, it was a love-in at Woburn Abbey in the 1960s. And there I went in my rebellious green velvet trousers. And I found about 10,000 other people also had green velvet trousers as well. It was another uniform. And my rebelliousness was not really being rebellious. I was being controlled, but by other forces. And sometimes that you wonder, what is this controlling all about? And sometimes you feel what it's like to be controlled. And sometimes you go around controlling others. How many of you would rebel against your parents? Because you were young, your hormones were raging, you wanted to go out, you wanted to sleep in, you wanted to have your boyfriends and girlfriends and experiment, but you're told not to. And now that you are parents yourself, you're being big hypocrites, and you're telling your children not to do the things which you wanted to do and probably did do. There's something in that which really rankles me. That for 1 year I was a school teacher. I remember just having a big conflict inside of myself. Should I sort of discipline those children in this school for doing things which I would have done maybe 2 or 3 years earlier? I remember these kids coming down. It was a nice day, and I went for a walk down this lane in this summertime and late afternoon. Lunchtime in the county of Devon. It's a beautiful day. I went down a lane. I saw a couple of the sixth formers when I was grade 12, or probably the equivalent to the first year at university in Australia, coming down the road, and as soon as they saw me, a teacher, their hands went behind their back. I know what that was, because that's what I used to do. That's when you're smoking and you're trying to hide a cigarette, a dead giveaway. And there was a narrow lane, they couldn't miss me, they couldn't turn around, so they're very, very embarrassed. And I told them, look, that's not the way to hide a cigarette. But there's no way I would discipline those kids, even though it was against the school rules, because I felt being a hypocrite. I was rebelling against those rules, and why should I sort of impose those rules on others? But then again, you're supposed to be trying to nurture these children and to respect sort of authority structures. And there was a big conflict inside of me. How much should give liberation, and how much should you control? And that is a dilemma which many parents feel. And it's a dilemma which many couples feel. And it's a dilemma which any person in authority feels. How much should you control? And how much should you liberate? But so to investigate, what actually is this controlling thing anyway? And when you actually start looking inside what really controlling is, and it is always trying to sort of thinking, it bases on the illusion that number one, I know best, and I'm in power to make something much better. And some of those delusions which people have, just it's an arrogance to think you know best. I don't know if any of you ever read the report on the stolen generation, but there was an arrogance there of the people 40, 50 years ago who took Aboriginal children out of their families. Imagine that was you, and you happened to be born Aboriginal, and people came in the day or the middle of the night and took your kids away, saying it's much better for the kids to take them away from their mother and father. That's what they did. And you can see there that they assumed that we're going to do something better. This was in the public's interest. This was good for you. And too often the reason why we start controlling is the delusion that we know best. And you can see just how many, especially religious people, try and exert control over others based on the assumption that we know best. And I've seen that in some forms of Christianity, fortunately not all forms of Christianity. I'm talking about the evangelicals. You see that in fundamentalist Islam. And that's something which I never want to be part of, as a religious leader. Because I see that, number one, that to say you know best. It's one thing, if you do know something, one size fits all is not accurate. And number two, very often that you are imperfect like other people, you make mistakes. And what right do you think that you know and you've got the best idea what other people want? But you can actually see that in fundamentalist religions. But can you see that in the way you look after your kids and try and control them? Sometimes there's something called fundamentalist parenting. I know best. This is what you should do. You better do it or else. And just like a fundamentalist parent, a fundamentalist person in religion, you use all sorts of jihad against your children to make them do what you think is the best. But that's not just with children. Sometimes that's in a relationship, in a marriage. Sometimes there's a controlling partner. And again, they use all sorts of means to try and make you into what they think you should be. Now, remember when it was a child, how did you feel? Was that really functional? Did that really make you a better kid? In a relationship, a partnership between two people, is that going to really make you into sort of a more loving person? Is that going to make the marriage really hold? Or if you're in a teacher-student relationship, or like a religious leader, is that going to really make any sort of sense? That's actually controlling. So first of all, that one should really look at the fact that does one really know what's best? And number two, is that the best way of going about it? And the other thing, is it the best way of going about it? Just controlling people. I've seen a lot of people who have had this incredible courage to give another person freedom, to trust them. And when they stop controlling or even lessening the control and give a person more freedom, usually the case is, in 9 cases out of 10, the person actually lives up to that freedom and they blossom and they grow from that freedom. And all the fears which we have, if I let my kid go to that nightclub, if I let my sort of wife just come home by her own, if I let my husband just go out for a meeting with his friends at some sort of bar, all those fears which one has, if one doesn't have that trust, those fears usually get fulfilled. But if you trust somebody and give them that trust and they know you're trusting them, usually there's some other psychology at work. If you give a person freedom, very often they live up to that freedom. That's what I found. There's something there with that trust. And that sort of trust, is an opposite of controlling. It is what we mean in Buddhism by metta. Door of my heart's open to you no matter what you ever do. I trust you, I love you, I respect you. And because I give you that love and respect, I hope you do the right thing, but I'll forgive you if you don't. Because where there's control, there'll always be fear. Fear from the controller of them not doing what you want, and fear from the person being controlled of what might happen if I don't do what I'm told. And again, many religions, many political parties, many bosses, they work on that fear, to control a person. And that's a very, very unpleasant world to live in. In places where I've had people in authority trying to control you and making threats, if you do something wrong, this is what will happen to you. Or like, when I was in school, if you break the school rules, you get the cane. All that taught me was not to get caught. That's all it taught me. And that type of control, which was allied with fear, was completely dysfunctional. I never learned anything much from that except being very skillful to try and get out of having to go to the principal's office. And that's actually what will happen in a relationship if it's a controlling relationship. The other person, being controlled, will eventually rebel but they'll be afraid, and all they will learn is how to be more skillful in not getting caught. In other words, there's no trust there, there's no love, there's no sort of real humanity there. And so that it's wonderful to be in a situation where you feel you're not being controlled. To have this sense of like freedom and independence. But that freedom and independence you should look very carefully at, because even though that sometimes we think we're in this bubble of freedom, and our partners, our bosses, our religion, or our company, whoever is an authority over you, seems to be giving you freedom, sometimes there is some more subconscious or surreptitious controlling going on. And of course, people have become more and more smart in how to control you without you realizing it. And of course, advertising is one of the greatest means of control, the greatest successful control mechanisms, because people see advertising and they don't understand or realize that they are being totally controlled. Your hairstyle, your clothes, just where you go at night, where you go on holidays, what you eat. How much of that is your free choice? And how much of that is actually you've been told what to do by the advertisers? And sometimes it's frightening to know how much that we are controlled by advertisers, by the billboards. If you weren't controlled, there would be no money in advertising. And the surreptitious thing about advertising is we don't realize how we're being conditioned and brainwashed. This is one of the more difficult things about control, because you ask, what is actually freedom? Is freedom to do what I want, but do I really want to do this? Or has this been conditioned by my culture? And why do people actually just go to, say, Subiaco Oval or the Wacker and just watch, a few people just kick a ball around, shouting backwards and forwards, and then sort of your team loses anyway, and you go home miserable? When you look at just the Australian sport of AFL, I think there's 16 teams in that league. Every year, 15 teams are disappointed and upset, and only one team has any happiness that year. So whatever team you support, you've got 15 to 1 chance of being miserable for one whole year. But why is it that people do that? Because actually it's almost conditioned to it. It's our national sport. We have to do it. Why is it, for example, one of my experiences as a young man is being like 14 years of age, being rebellious, being with my mates, a bit of peer pressure, but also being rebellious, going to take my first glass of beer. The drinking age was 18, I was only 14. Sneak in there, and take a glass of beer, thinking how clever I am, how rebellious. And taking my first glass of beer, I couldn't believe just how disgusting that tasted. I did see in the newspapers there was a suggestion of actually Perth drinking recycled wastewater, from your toilets. And that's what I thought beer was, somehow recycled from the lavatory, because that's what it tastes like. Even actually people do call it piss in Australia. So that must be recycled from somewhere. But it tasted awful. But because my culture, this was in London, said that beer is fun, beer is good, beer is what you're supposed to enjoy, and you spend a lot of money and many evenings drinking this stuff, it only took me about 3 or 4 months to start to like the taste. And once I became a monk and I look back on that experience, I thought, why did I like that? Because I had to. I completely reconditioned myself to go against my natural instincts of disliking the taste of beer to actually thinking it was delicious. And being a monk, when you stand back and you watch these things, how much more of what I think I like has actually been conditioned into me because I have to like it, because my society says I must like it. How free are you, or how much have you been controlled? Like, some girls, they don't want to have a boyfriend. They just want to be, free by themselves. But sometimes society, you've got to get a boyfriend. Your mother and father, when are you going to find a boyfriend? When are you going to get married? When are you going to have a child? And the pressure is on you And sometimes that because of that pressure we get conditioned into doing what other people want. And this is a big problem for human beings. The pressure to conform. The pressure to do what other people want, to please others. How much is that feeling like you're being controlled? So much so that a lot of people get into frustration, anger, depression, simply because that is a stress coming from outside. In the book which I wrote, Open the Door of the Heart, I made a very powerful quote in there. And the quote was, never allow what other people say to control your happiness. And I've extended that since. Why is it what other people say you allow them to control you? And that's a powerful means of control in our world. It's called learning your weak points, pushing your buttons. They find out what upsets you. We speak to each other a lot in our society. We find out what really upsets you. And once we see the reaction there, we can keep using that again and again and again. The weak spot of a human being. And that often happens in relationships or with friends. We tease each other. We know exactly how to harm and hurt the other person. And that especially happens in marriages, where you see people who've been married a long time, they say these snide remarks to each other again and again and again. And when you hear that so often, no wonder there's a divorce just coming soon. You hear that with so-called friends putting each other down. And why do we say such rotten words to each other? Because we want to control the other person. And you know what it's like when people find your weak spot. And so, the advice is, it doesn't matter what a person says, no matter what they call you. My favorite word of abuse now, because I read this in a book and I mentioned this, I think, in Malaysia a few weeks ago, was about a person who say, this is a curse from the Middle East. It said, may the fleas of 1,000 camels infest your armpits. It's quite neat, isn't it? Say to somebody else, may the fleas of 1,000 camels infest your armpits. So when you go home today and you're upset at your husband or your wife, that's what you can call them next time. And you know you got it from Ajahn Brahm. It doesn't matter if someone says that. What are you going to do if someone tries to abuse you with words like that or something worse? Why do you allow other people's words to upset you? And you will keep on, until they find the right words which really get deep into you. Find your weak spot. And then they'll use that again and again. So it's great not allowing other people to upset you. Quite often, in the early days here in Perth, people go around, so they see me dressed in these clothes and say, you're wearing women's clothes, you're not a proper man, you're a girl, go and get a proper job, Hare Krishna, whatever else they say. Because it's great being a monk like this because, you're wearing funny clothes and you're tested out. But there's no reason to allow people to upset you. And so I have great fun, dressing in clothes like this. And I remember going on a bus once and just down Charles Street, and then somebody started teasing me. And so I said, I'll give as good as I got. I said, you got long hair, you're like a girl, you should shape it all off like me. And as soon as I started fighting back, the other guys, they got really embarrassed. And the reason was because I was not going to get embarrassed. I was not going to be controlled. I was going to sort of have some fun. And when you actually aren't controlled by other people, you've got this incredible freedom. So why do you allow what other people say to control you? If somebody says something mean and horrible, that's their business. Nothing to do with me. If they call me an idiot, lazy, just an idiot, or one of the the favourite comments, I was walking through the streets of, Doncaster in the north of England many years ago. And, wearing our robes. I was with this monk, Ajahn, who was about 20 years older than me. And this guy came up in this suit, a business guy, on his way to work early in the morning. And he looked at us, really with disgust. But he turned on this Ajahn and looked at him and said, "You're old enough to know better." I know I was young enough to be stupid, but this guy, he was 40. That's a great comment. But why do you allow yourself to be upset by these people? And you don't have to. You don't need to be controlled. This is the first place of rebellion. I'm not talking about wearing green velvet trousers or men wearing skirts or whatever. I'm talking about rebelling wisely, not allowing other people to control you. If you want to get angry, fine, I'm going to get angry. If you want to get upset, that's my business. I decide to get upset. But I won't make an automatic reaction. When you start to do things like that, you get an incredible amount of freedom. And also wisdom, because you are starting to break the habits. For this evening's talk, that I'm going to expand on a talk which I gave last night to the monks at the monastery over in Serpentine, and talk about the problem between control and freedom. Because many of you, like all of us, sometimes feel being pressed between other people wanting to control us, life controlling us, governments controlling us, even religions trying to control us, but also the fear of freedom and misunderstanding what freedom is. And should we actually control others? Because sometimes we have children. Should we be controlling them? Should we be controlling our diet? Should we be controlling the world? What should we do? What to do? It's an open road. It's quite safe. And sometimes you read in the newspaper about food which you like is supposed to be fattening for you. And they say, why should I listen to what they say? I'm going to eat what I like. Why should people be trying to control me? And then you go into a relationship, and sometimes you feel your partner is trying to control you, or in the relationship and then it's your mother trying to control you. And you say, look, I'm 50 years old and I'm married. I'm not a baby anymore. But still that mothers try and control you, even fathers try and control you, and governments try and control you. And the media tries to control you to make sure you listen to their programs or buy their products. And sometimes that we just feel like that we're in this battle between other people trying to control us, trying to possess us, trying to make us do what they want to do. And sometimes that we're controlled even when we go to places like airports, which I frequent very often. You have to board at a certain time, you have to go with certain things, you can't carry this and you can't carry that and you can't bring this into the country, and you have to board at a certain time with people sitting in the back rows, please board first. And sometimes we feel that there's an assault on our freedoms. And the worst assault on our freedoms comes from life itself. When I want to enjoy myself, I want to be free, but I've got a bad back, I've got a bad knee, I've got a headache, I'm getting old and I can't do those things which I want to do. And of course, how should we interact? And the whole idea of control becomes a very important thing we should truly understand. Because control is the opposite of freedom. And especially in Western worlds, but not just in Western worlds, we worship freedom, and quite rightly so. And we try and resist, control. And because of that, we always have a sense of contradiction in our lives between controlling and freedom. And this is what I want to explore in this evening's talk. And especially exploring it from a Buddhist perspective, where we're supposed to be letting go and liberating ourselves from cravings and attachments, and taking the no control to very, very powerful and deep levels, and actually seeing what happens when you do fully let go. But to start from the ordinary lifestyle of human beings in this world, that we live in an age where there are many groups and powerful beings, powerful people, powerful religions, powerful forces of nature, which you feel are trying to control you, and some of those you recognize, some of those you don't recognize. And I'm not quite sure about you, but even when I was young, I would like to resist those controllers. And what right have they to tell me what to do? And I'm sure that many of you that resent having speed cameras and speed limits, especially if you don't realize why they're there. Why should they tell me